Not doing anything at all is tamasic inertia. Not doing anything on my own, doing only what the divine wants me to do, is surrendering the personal will to the divine will. So the two are entirely different. We are currently on a series based on a collection of the Mother's passages in this book, The Great Adventure. And for the last few turns, we have been talking about surrender. Today's passages also deal with the same topic, and understandably so, because surrender is an extremely important subject. While true surrender can be a great aid in sadhana, it can also be very difficult. But at the same time, surrender, when misunderstood, can also be extremely convenient. I need not do anything because I have surrendered myself totally to the divine. That can be a very convenient stand which one can take, and therefore to distinguish this type of a tamasic inertia from true surrender is important, and that's why probably so many passages in this book are devoted to surrender. The first of these passages that we'll talk about today compares personal effort with surrender. The passage is entitled Tapasya and Surrender, and the mother says, "The path of tapasya is arduous. Here you rely solely upon yourself, you proceed by your own strength, you ascend and achieve according to the measure of your force. There's always the danger of falling down, and once you fall, you lie broken in the abyss, and there's hardly a remedy. The other path, the path of surrender, is safe and sure. It is here, however, that the Western people find their difficulty. They have been taught to fear and avoid all that threatens their personal independence. They have imbibed with their mother's milk the sense of individuality. And surrender means giving up all that. In other words, you may follow, as Sri Ramakrishna says, either the path of the baby monkey or that of the baby cat. The baby monkey holds to its mother in order to be carried about, and it must hold firm, otherwise it loses its grip. On the other hand, the baby cat does not hold to its mother, but is held by the mother and has no fear nor responsibility. It has nothing to do but to let the mother hold it and cry, Mama." Now here you can see there are hints of the dangers of personal effort, the path of surrender, the contrast between the two, and also a combination of the two, because the two are not mutually exclusive, personal effort and surrender. Now let's go bit by bit and see this passage again. "The path of tapasya is arduous. Here you rely solely upon yourself. You proceed by your own strength. You ascend and achieve according to the measure of your force." Now here in this path of sadhana, in this type of a method chosen for spiritual progress, the emphasis is on the individual's own efforts. And the person is quite satisfied with achieving according to the measure of his force, which means he is quite content to have gains or make progress which is proportional to the effort. In other words, he is quite satisfied with the prize. He is not interested in a gift. The divine can also give us a gift, which is divine grace. Gift is disproportionate to our effort. It has often no bearing on the effort. It's just given out of love. But a prize has to be won. And the prize, the magnitude of the prize, the quantum of the prize is proportional to the effort. Now, the person is quite content with that. If the person is content with it, is that okay? Or is there some other further problem involved? There is a problem, because as the mother says here, there's always the danger of falling down. If one depends entirely on one's own efforts, there's also the danger of falling down. And once you fall, you lie broken in the abyss, and there is hardly a remedy. Now this is an important question, because very often one of the questions that is asked is, can we practice yoga if we do not believe in God? Now naturally one can practice but then one cannot believe in the path of surrender, because if one does not believe in God, one cannot surrender to God. And therefore, it is possible to practice yoga depending entirely on one's own efforts, but then it carries a lot of risk. The first handicap is that the progress will be proportional to the effort. The second risk is that life is erratic and unpredictable, and therefore one will not be able to handle all the unforeseen and unpredictable things that happen. Because no matter how intelligent a person is, how hardworking the person is, none of us has perfect control over life. Something or the other will be going wrong, and the person will not be able to handle it unless he has also surrendered to the divine. But here probably the mother is also talking of some still greater risks when she says that there is always the danger of falling down, and once you fall, you lie broken in the abyss and there is hardly a remedy. Now what are these dangers which lie on the spiritual path itself if the person is depending entirely on his or her own efforts? This is something which I find quite often in some of the young visitors to the ashram. Not too many, so many of you who are young here doesn't mean that you are in that type of a situation. But there are, in fact, some very well-meaning, very serious and sincere young people who make a conscious decision very early in their life to be on the spiritual path. They get some sort of a calling from somewhere for one reason or the other. They decide that the ordinary worldly life is not for me. I will walk the spiritual path. And very often by the time they come here, you find that they are quite fit to be sent to a psychiatrist. Now how does that happen? How do they land in that sort of an abyss while being so serious about pursuing a goal that is so lofty, a goal that in fact is the very goal of human existence? One of the traps in which they fall is what I like to call the grandiosity trap. They feel that now that I have made a conscious choice to pursue the divine, which is the highest goal, most of the others are pursuing very ordinary worldly goals, and therefore they feel that I have already risen one notch above the humanity. That is one of the dangers that comes. So, the second type of problem that you find with some such people is that they fall in what you may call the transactional trap. They feel I have made so much of a sacrifice. I have sacrificed all my worldly goals, all the physical comforts and everything that I could have got, married life and everything else I have sacrificed. So at least in exchange I should get some rapid spiritual progress. So they enter into some sort of a commerce with the divine, and they feel that I have made so much effort, I have made so much sacrifice, so in exchange they want something spectacular to happen rather fast. They are impatient. They are in a great hurry for something to happen because after all they have sacrificed so much. That is the second type of trap in which you find them. The third type of trap in which you find them is the signboard trap, what I call the signboard trap. Which means they say, well, now that I have decided to be spiritual, I have started wearing only clothes of white color. I have started having long hair or something. I carry a rosary with me and I count the beads all the time. I meditate so many hours in a day. I eat only organic food. I do this much asanas and this much pranayamas. I'm looking for more and more advanced yogic practices which I can learn from somewhere. Which means that they catch hold of all the external signs which they find in some people on the spiritual path, and they feel if I do all of them, plenty of them, the harder the ones the better, spend more and more time on them, then probably I'll make very fast progress. Which means that while they have caught quite correctly some of the external signs which you find in some of the people on the spiritual path, they have missed the real thing. That is, the change in fact is within, and it is that change inside which might get reflected in some of the outer signs. And in the process of getting involved in all these outer signs, the signboards of being on the spiritual path, what has happened is that they are completely wrapped up in themselves. They are living primarily for themselves because they have all those 24 hours available only for doing something or the other. If not any of these external signs, then they said the rest of the time I'm reading spiritual books. So they want to read as much as possible, as fast as possible. So they read, they do all these external things. So for 24 hours a day, they are living for themselves. And the only difference is that they are living for themselves for the sake of a spiritual goal. The rest of the world is living for itself for material goals. But basically, they are also living for themselves. Now, that is the other type of trap I find. So these are some of the traps you find, and then they get impatient that if I am doing so much, why is nothing spectacular happening? And then something spectacular does sometimes happen. What happens is, while they are meditating, they see some light, they see some image, and then they come and say, I saw this. Does it mean much? Then, which means they try to hold on to that image, they want to repeat it by will, and they want more of those images, more of those lights to happen, and then they feel, well, this is spirituality. These are some of the three traps in which they fall, and that is why the mother is saying, when you depend entirely on your own efforts, there's always the danger of falling into one of these traps. The other path, the path of surrender, is safe and sure. It is here, however, that the Western people find their difficulty. They have been taught to fear and avoid all that threatens their personal independence. They have imbibed with their mother's milk the sense of individuality, and surrender means giving up all that. Now, the other path is the path of surrender, that I leave myself in the hands of the divine, and the divine will guide me. So I am not in a hurry, I am not impatient, and I have surrendered myself to the divine. But then the question comes, surrendered what? That question will come up a little more in detail in the next passage, so I will not go over it in detail right now. But surrender what? That becomes important. And surrender to whom? Surrender personal will, yes. Surrender personal will to the divine will. Surrender the outcome of the work that we do to the divine. Yes, that is fine. But not surrender to injustice, not surrender to indiscriminate higher authority which is behaving in an arbitrary manner. It's not the type of surrender. Surrender to the divine and surrender of these things. Now, this path also, although even after being clear about what is to be surrendered and to whom we have to surrender, not just the Western mind, I would say the Westernized mind, or even more broadly, the mind that places reason on a very high pedestal. Because in the last few hundred years, the West particularly has passed through the age of reason. That has given us all the progress in science and technology. And a society which has been accustomed to thinking in terms of logic, has refined logic to a very high degree, and has achieved a lot as a result of that in science and technology. Naturally, that society has come to worship reason and individuality, and this type of a mind finds it very difficult to surrender to that unseen, unknown force which we are not aware of at the mental level. Because reason is a mental construct, and it's a mental ability, and at that level certainly none of us is conscious of the divine, and therefore they find it very difficult to surrender to that. But then there is another way of looking at surrender, because what we are afraid of is surrendering our individuality and thereby losing our existence, losing our personal existence as individuals, feeling minimized, feeling as if we have lost our existence itself. What is left of me if I have surrendered myself completely to someone? That is the sort of feeling one gets. But then, once we are clear to whom we are surrendering, we can just turn it around and use the same logic to see that that does not diminish us. Surrender does not diminish us. Surrender enlarges us. Because what we have done is we have surrendered to a power and a knowledge that is far greater than what we are capable of. So if we join ourselves and place ourselves at the disposal of that which is all-knowing and all-powerful, knows much more than we do and has much greater strength, then we have access to that. We have enlarged ourselves. It enables us to avoid all the types of mistakes that we might make because of our limited wisdom. It will enhance our capacity so that now we'll be capable of doing all that we were incapable of doing because of our limited power. So, by adding the power and the knowledge of the divine, in fact, it has enlarged us. So, placing ourselves at the disposal of that, subordinating the lower to the higher, subordinating the limited to the unlimited, subordinating the finite to the infinite, is not the type of surrender that will diminish us, but in fact enlarges us and gives us access to some of these infinite and unlimited characteristics of the divine itself. And therefore, that surrender is not something that really diminishes us. In other words, you may follow, as Sri Ramakrishna says, either the path of the baby monkey or that of the baby cat. The baby monkey holds to its mother in order to be carried about, and it must hold firm, otherwise, if it loses its grip, it falls. Now, a baby monkey certainly trusts the mother, loves the mother, and is quite willing to be carried about wherever the mother takes it. But at the same time, it's not depending entirely on the mother, it also is making its own effort to hold on to the mother. So here is a combination of effort and surrender. Whereas the baby cat does not hold to its mother, but is held by the mother and has no fear nor responsibility. The cat, carries around its kittens in the mouth, and the kitten is quite sure the mother is carrying me in the mouth but will not actually bite me. And it makes no effort to hold on to the mother, leaves entirely everything to the mother. So in yoga also we have both the possibilities available. We may depend on our own efforts to varying degrees. Some would depend on almost total surrender and make very little effort, and some would depend on a combination of effort and surrender. But certainly to depend entirely on one's own efforts is a path that will neither make us progress fast, nor is it free from risks and dangers. And that's why, while it is possible to practice yoga without believing in God, it's much easier and much safer to practice it believing in God. So that is the contrast between the baby cat and the baby monkey. And most of us find it convenient to be a bit like the baby monkey, depending on a combination of personal effort and surrender. And certainly some personal effort is important. We may not call it personal in the sense that if we have surrendered our will entirely to the divine will, then we can say that yes, I am not doing anything on my own. But to say that I am not doing anything at all is different from saying that I am not doing anything on my own. Not doing anything at all is tamasic inertia. Not doing anything on my own, doing only what the divine wants me to do, is surrendering the personal will to the divine will. So the two are entirely different. And therefore, total inaction is not what is meant by surrender. Action, yes, but action as we interpret the divine will to be. And how we interpret the divine will, we have talked about many times. If there will be time, we'll talk again. But anyway, let's go to the next passage, which also will bring it in one way or the other. The next passage concentrates on what to surrender. The most important surrender is the surrender of your character, your way of being, so that it may change. If you do not surrender your very own nature, never will this nature change. It is this that is most important. You have certain ways of understanding, certain ways of reacting, certain ways of feeling, almost certain ways of progressing, and above all, a special way of looking at life and expecting from it certain things. Well, it is this you must surrender. That is, if you truly want to receive the divine light and transform yourself, it is your whole way of being you must offer. Offer by opening it, making it as receptive as possible, so that the divine consciousness, which sees how you ought to be, may act directly and change all these movements into movements more true, more in keeping with your real truth. This is infinitely more important than surrendering what one does. Now let's go over it a little slowly. The most important surrender is the surrender of your character. Now, this can be misinterpreted because the modern meaning of the word character most commonly is the best part of us, something which acts on the basis of sense of what is right and wrong and tries to do the right things. That is what we call character. But character has also another dictionary meaning in which the mother has used it, and that is what is inherent in our nature, the way we are likely to behave on our own spontaneously. That is also our character. So that is the sense in which she has used it here. The most important surrender is the surrender of your character. That is, surrender of the way we are normally likely to behave. Your way of being, so that it may change. Now, if we are not ready to change, we certainly can't get any better. It looks axiomatic, but then everybody wants to get better, but everybody resists change. Now, there is where the paradox lies. So, if we have to get better, we have to change, and what we have to change is our character or our inherent way of behaving. And what does that depend upon? We are all potentially divine, as Swami Vivekananda said, which means that we all have the divine within us and we have the potential of becoming one with it. But the fact is that on the surface we have all these surface instruments, the body, the mind and the intellect, which keep this potential divinity behind a thick veil, behind a thick cover. And therefore, what we need to do is to modify this external covering, to break through it, and this requires a change. Now, what is this external covering made up of? Primarily the modes through which the Prakriti acts. Because the Prakriti is acting in us through certain modes, and the three primary modes are Tamas, Rajas and Sattva. That is how the Prakriti is acting, and that is what gives us a certain character. Tamas is the principle of inertia and ignorance. It breeds laziness, mechanical repetition of things, trying to do things in a perfunctory manner, doing them slowly, doing them only when compelled to do, delaying things. Now, all this is a part of tamas. Not wanting a change is also a part of tamas, in fact. Resisting change is also a type of tamas. So, this is all the principle of tamas. What is the principle of rajas? The principle of rajas is one of dynamism, kinetic activity, but activity which is motivated by passions and desires and driven primarily by the ego, and therefore this type of a tendency, while it does lead to a lot of worldly action and achievement, it might be all this activity might be performed in a rather unscrupulous manner, unethical manner, and therefore the person may achieve a lot, but at the expense of the legitimate rights of others by doing wrong things. So that is rajas. And what is sattva? Sattva is the principle of light and harmony, wisdom, and being able to see the right things, the principle of moderation, acting on the basis of knowledge and the sense of ethics. Now all that comes under sattva. Now in worldly action, what generally works best is a combination of rajas and sattva. That is, certainly one should have that rajas and be active, but at the same time this activity should be motivated by light and harmony, the principle of sattva. Now each one of us has each one of these three, tamas, rajas and sattva. The proportion in which they are there determine our character, determine the way we behave. But then the proportion in which we have them today need not be the proportion in which we have them all our life. The entire practice of yoga depends upon that we are capable of change, we are capable of tilting this balance, move from tamas to rajas and from rajas to sattva, which means we can go on moving more and more towards sattva. And then of course the Gita tells us it is possible also to go beyond sattva, because even sattva is not perfect. Sattva is not the divine itself, it is the best mode of prakriti, but it is not yet a proper and full manifestation of the divine. That would be manifested only if we are able to move beyond sattva, because sattva also has an ego, and that is the type of ego which enters some of these people, who young people particularly, who get obsessed with spirituality, when they say that, well, I am doing this, I am doing that, and I am doing this, and I am doing that, and they are completely wrapped up in that. Now that is also a type of sattva. I don't eat inorganic, I eat only organic food, I wear only this type of clothes, I do this, and I don't do this, and I don't do this, and I don't do this. So what all they do and what all they don't do, to be wrapped up in that is also a type of sattvic ego. So one has to go even beyond that and transcend that. So, the most important surrender is the surrender of your character, your way of being, so that it may change. So, to become ready for a change in character, change in this proportion of tamas, rajas and sattva within us, is also a type of surrender, because we have surrendered in a way our tamas. We have surrendered our tendency to resist change. We are ready to become different from what we already are. So that is the most important surrender. If you do not surrender your very own nature, never will this nature change. Because yes, certainly the way we are now need not be the way we stay all our life, but it will not change on its own. The change requires some effort on our part, and certainly more than effort, a willingness to change, which is in itself a surrender. It is this that is most important. You have certain ways of understanding, certain ways of reacting, certain ways of feeling, almost certain ways of progressing, and above all, a special way of looking at life and expecting from it certain things. Well, it is this you must surrender. Under identical circumstances, different people do not behave in the same way. So that's what the mother is saying. We have different ways of understanding life, looking at life, and therefore there are different ways in which we react and respond to different circumstances. And just to sort of give a few examples, there are people who have a lot of money, and they respond to it by buying more and more things, constructing a bigger and bigger house, having a larger number of cars, because they have a certain way of looking at life, there's a certain way they think. There are some people who feel that, well, I need to be physically reasonably comfortable, but I should also save something for the rainy day. So they save also quite a bit. They don't spend everything that they have. And they feel, well, I should do something for others. So they say, well, 10% of my income will go in charity. They feel they've done enough. No, that is also another way of looking at it. There are also people like Sri Aurobindo who said that if I keep anything more than I need strictly for myself, I consider myself a thief. Now, these are identical circumstances. The way one thinks about it is different. Now, how we behave in identical circumstances depends upon this combination of tamas, rajas and sattva. And if a person has gone even beyond sattva, then he will react still differently, behave differently. Now, so on what does this behavior depend under a certain set of circumstances? This depends upon how we look at life, how we understand life, what the goal of our life is, how we have learned to make choices in different circumstances. Because ultimately life boils down to a series of choices. All these people have a certain amount of money, much more than they can spend on reasonable needs of their own. But they are reacting in different ways, responding in different ways to the same circumstance. What does that depend upon? That depends upon how they look at life. Whether they look at life as something which begins with birth, ends with death, and the interval between the two has to be filled with as much physical comfort as possible, or whether they look at life as something which is not to be lived in isolation, but to be lived with consciousness of the existence of others around us. They are also our fellow beings, they are also human beings, and therefore if I am more fortunate than them, let me share something with them. Or whether their understanding of life is that this life is only a small interval, a small interlude in a series of lives, and this life has been given to me with a purpose, and the purpose is to progress spiritually. And if the purpose is to progress spiritually, the first thing I have to realize is that I should be able to look at the world from the spiritual angle. And if I look at the world from the spiritual angle, I find that I am in fact related to everybody else. I am one with everybody else, because the divine essence of mine is the same as the divine essence in anybody else. So at that level we are all one. So the first thing that I have to do is to break the barrier between me and the rest of the creation. And when I break that barrier, then I start seeing, well, I have certain needs to live in greater physical comfort. Others have certain needs which are far more pressing. They are hungry, they are ill, they are miserable, they are illiterate. whatever problem appeals to me the most. They have these problems. These problems are much more important than my need to live in physical comfort. So, because they are one with me, I pool my needs with their needs, and therefore now what matters to me is not whose need it is, but which need is greater. And I started addressing the greatest of needs first, and then think of others. The way I'm Sri Aurobindo says, so long as my basic needs have been fulfilled, I do not have any right to keep anything more. I'll consider myself a thief, because there is always people around who have very pressing needs. So I try to keep the minimum for myself. So, that is what comes when you look at the rest of the creation also as part of yourself, as yourself. That barrier is completely broken. That is the Rishi's consciousness. So this is how our understanding can change. Now, how does this change come about? First, it's not that we have to be born with that Rishi's consciousness. Secondly, it is also not necessary that we have to get very concerned that I must reach the Rishi's consciousness in this life. What is important is to see that when I have a certain set of circumstances in life, what type of choices do I make and how do I make those choices? If I make the right choices, they'll take me towards the Rishi's consciousness. I'll take a few steps in that direction. How many steps I can take would depend not only upon how good choices I make, but also partly on how much homework I have done in my previous lives. Because this is only an interlude between lives. So even with the right choices, it's very difficult to make the right choices all my life. Because that type of circumstances and that type of mentality comes very rarely. But as and when I gradually start learning how to make those choices, even then the intellect and the emotions very often intervene and end up making the choices which I know are wrong, but yet I make them. That they take me one step away from the Rishi's consciousness, not towards it. But even if I make fairly frequently the type of choices that will take me in the right direction, all what it enables me in doing is taking a few steps in the right direction. Whether I'll get the Rishi's consciousness or not doesn't matter. What is important is that I have taken the steps in the right direction. I have understood the purpose of life, and far before I actually reach the Rishi's consciousness or union with the divine, I start feeling much happier and healthier. That is so, it means that it is not an all or none process, it is a graded process. And every step that I take in the right direction brings me something in return. And therefore, I don't have to be obsessed with when I will get there. That doesn't bring the goal any nearer. The final goal of union with the divine doesn't come any nearer if I get obsessed with it. In fact, it starts outdistancing us. That has been sort of the general refrain of all spiritual masters. Whenever people have tried to ask them how much progress I have made, have I got there? Their answers are usually very interesting. Some of the answers, the type of answers which the mother used to give was, if somebody asked her, have I got there? Have I reached that ultimate destination? She would tell, if you were there, you would already know it. You wouldn't be asking this question. You see, the fact that you're asking the question indirectly means you are not yet there. Sometimes she told them, who told you to worry about your progress? That I will take care of. You just do what you are supposed to do. What you are supposed to do is do everything with me. Be conscious of me when whatever you are doing. Even when you are brushing your teeth, be conscious of me. That's all what you have to do. I'll take care of your progress. Now, these are the types of questions they give. They never try to make the person feel that yes, if you try harder, you will get there faster, or be obsessed with it. The aspiration should be there. The aspiration should be intense. Even more important, the aspiration should be sincere, but the aspiration should not be impatient. That is what is important. So, what it means is that we have to surrender our nature, surrender of the way we look at things, the way we think about things, the way we look at life, and that essentially boils down to making the right choices. It's something like driving. Suppose you are driving and you have to drive towards your destination. You're not worried about the destination because the destination is too far, but in this case, but at least We have to make the right choices whenever we reach the crossroads or the T junctions. We have to make the right choices. Turn right or turn left. That we have to know. And for making those choices, we have the mind and the intellect and the soul to guide us. The way these function, particularly the mind and the intellect, the way these function depends upon this, the mode in which they are, tamas, rajas or sattva. And how we actually make the choice can change with time. The same person who acted primarily on the basis of the intellect, making calculations of gain and loss as a young person, trying to concentrate on worldly goals as a young person, maybe after 10 years, 20 years, may make choices which are based on a different criterion. The yardstick is different. The yardstick is not worldly gain and loss, but the yardstick is what is it that will help others. The yardstick can change. So it is this type of a change which is important, and as that happens, which in other words means, as you might have, some of you who have been coming here more often would have seen, that what I'm trying to say is that the choices should start shifting more and more from the choice made by the mind, which is based on what feels good, based on the intellect, which gives us reasons for what will be on the whole profitable. From these two, the choice should move towards a choice based on the voice of the psychic being or the soul, which tells us what is exactly the right thing to do. And as the choice shifts in that direction, not only we start feeling happier, because listening to the psychic being gives us a sense of joy, it gives us a sense of peace, lasting mental peace. It avoids the type of uneasiness and sense of guilt which may come when we do not pay heed to it. It not only does that, it does something else. It starts transforming the mind and the intellect. Transformation of the mind means that now the mind starts feeling good about what this voice of the soul is telling us. Because the very nature of the mind is to pull us towards what feels good. We start feeling good about what the soul tells us, because in fact there is a sense of joy every time we pay heed to the soul. Say every time, instead of keeping all the money for myself, I give some money in charity, I get a sense of feeling good. So there is a joy in it. And when I start appreciating that joy and start distinguishing it from the type of happiness I get when I get something, a new dress or a new car, when I start distinguishing it from that, then I start valuing that more, and therefore my yardstick for making choices starts changing. Because I start valuing that joy, I find that joy has a different feel, that joy is much better in feel, it has a more durable character, it lasts much longer, and there is no unease or guilt associated with it. And therefore, I start making that type of choices. Now, that is the transformation of the mind. The mind or the emotions have been transformed so that now I start feeling good about doing what my psychic being is telling me. And what is transformation of the intellect? The intellect is very versatile. It acts on the basis of reason. When the intellect is transformed, it starts giving me the type of reasons which would justify what the psychic being is trying to tell me. It can justify just about anything we want. That is the beauty of the intellect. So now the intellect starts framing reasons which would justify what the psychic being or the soul is trying to tell me. And as this process proceeds, what would happen is that gradually the discrepancy between the mind, the intellect, and the soul will start disappearing. And when this disappears completely, that would be union with the divine, because that is total harmony. Because now my mind and intellect are functioning all the time in harmony with the soul. The soul is my divine essence. So if my surface instruments have also become divinized to the extent that now they behave one with it, they have become one with the divine, my divine essence. So they have become one with the divine. That is union with the divine. So for this discrepancy to disappear completely will take a long time, because that is the end of the journey. But all the steps that we take in that direction will gradually reduce this discrepancy, and the very reduction in this discrepancy itself takes away a lot of stresses and strains from life. Because most of the strains arise because of this discrepancy. The mind wants something because it feels good, the intellect wants something because it gives us reasons for that, and the soul tells, well, still yet another third thing is what is the right thing to do. Say, for example, in the days of the freedom struggle, the choice was very easy for young people to make. The choice would be, say, to spend time while the person is in school and college on all frivolous things which feel good and not study well. That is what the mind wants. What would the intellect want? The intellect is telling me, no, work hard, get good marks in the exam, then you will get a good career. That is what the intellect is telling me. And what is the soul telling me? Well, what is the use of all this when the country is not free? Let me jump into the freedom struggle. That's what Chachaji did at the age of 16. He gave up his studies. Chachaji was the founder of this ashram. At the age of 16, Mahatma Gandhi gave a call, let the young people forget their studies for a few years and jump into the freedom struggle. All the young people didn't do it. Probably many of them felt within, yes, it's the right thing to do, but then the intellect took over and they listened to the intellect. No, itne bevkoof nahi hai hum. Chachaji jumped into it and became a freedom fighter and remained in it for around 30 years till the independence. So this is the type of choices we face in life, and as we make more and more of the right choices, the discrepancy goes on reducing, and that itself takes away a lot of strains, because a lot of stresses in life are primarily because of this discrepancy. So surrender to that voice of the soul is not something which reduces us or diminishes us. It enlarges us, and it also brings us this sense of peace and joy. Transforms the mind and the intellect, and thereby starts reducing the discrepancy which gives us all the stresses, and it gives us a sense of fulfillment in life, because that is the very purpose of life, and therefore we start feeling fulfilled when we make this type of choices. So you have certain ways of understanding, certain ways of feeling, almost certain ways of progressing, which means the way you look at progress, and above all, a special way of looking at life and expecting from it certain things. Well, it is this that you must surrender. So we have to surrender our present way of thinking and looking at life and surrender it to the divine and start thinking, what is it that the divine would expect us to do? How is it that the divine wants us to look at life? And the divine is within us. We can consult that. That is the voice of the psychic being or the soul. That is, if you truly want to receive the divine light and transform yourself, it is your whole way of being you must offer. Offer by opening it, making it as receptive as possible, so that the divine consciousness, which sees how you ought to be, may act directly and change all these movements into movements more true, more in keeping with your real truth. What is our real truth? The soul. And in order to be more receptive to the divine influence, first we need to empty ourselves from what fills it already. Because you cannot fill a filled cup with something new. You first have to empty the cup. So if we are filled with the types of desires and passions which are based on the intellect, that is, what is it that will be profitable, what is it that will be comfortable, if we are filled with that, unless we empty ourselves of that and are ready to surrender ourselves to the divine, ready for a change, the cup is not yet empty. So that is receptivity. That is, if you truly want to receive the divine light, the light which will come from within, from the psychic being, and transform yourself, that is, transform the mind and the intellect, it is your whole way of being you must offer, which means we offer all of ourselves, the body, mind and intellect. All of it offered to the divine within us, that is the soul. Offer by opening it, making it as receptive as possible, so that the divine consciousness which sees how you ought to be, because the psychic being knows clearly what we ought to be. What we ought to be is different from what we already are. What we are is different from what not only we ought to be, but what we can become. So our potential is far greater than what we already are. So if we surrender ourselves in our present form to the divine, so that it can be transformed into what it ought to be and what it can be, then we have created the right conditions for that transformation, because the right conditions are, first, that we should be ready to receive, we should be ready for that change. This is infinitely more important than surrendering what one does. So what one does is not what is the only thing to be surrendered. Of course, what we do also had to be offered to the divine, because the outcome is not in our own hands. And the very ability and the circumstances to do it was given to us by the divine. And therefore, it is the divine that it should be offered. And if it has to be offered to the divine, then naturally the quality of the work should also be such that it is fit to be offered and surrendered. And therefore, we should put our heart and soul into whatever we are doing, not thinking that, well, the outcome is in his hands, so since the outcome anyway is not going to change, so how does it matter? So the quality should still be, we should put our heart and soul into it so that it is fit to be offered. All that is a part of Karma Yoga. But then, even more important than surrendering what one does, is to surrender all of ourselves. So you can see that in the surrender, there is a rung of surrender. You can say higher and higher rungs of surrender. And that is what you find in the Gita also. First comes karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. That is, you have a right to only the action, not its fruit. Which means, renounce the fruit, surrender the fruit. Then we are told that you are not even the doer. It's only an ahankar vimudha atma, one who has been bewildered by the ego, who thinks that I am the doer. In fact, we are only instruments in the hands of God. So renounce also the doership. So one more surrender. Surrender the doership and surrender the fruit. And then comes sarva dharman paritajya mamekam sharanam vraja. Forget all guidelines of right and wrong, just take refuge in me, which means surrender all of yourself. So first surrender the fruit, then surrender the action, and then surrender all of yourself. So in this also series, in the first session, we talked about surrendering the personal will to the divine will. Now we have reached the last stage, that is surrender all of ourselves, and that is the true surrender. And surrender all of ourselves. Within that, the most important thing is to surrender the way we are right now constituted. That is, realize that that is an imperfect constitution, and the way we are constituted in that imperfect way need not be the way we have to be all our life. We can change, we can become more perfect, we can approach perfection, we can be more like the divine within us, and every step that we take in that direction will not only take us nearer to the divine, but will also make us happier and healthier. I keep talking healthier because being a medical person, I always think of that, and the two are so closely connected because the mind and the body are so closely related. It's only if we are happy that we can be truly healthy. We cannot be healthy unless we are happy. The two are closely related. Now then, what is the goal of life? That takes us to the next point. Then what is the goal of life? Now, the goal itself keeps changing. That is how, as the way we think changes, the goal of life keeps changing. A young child, you ask a young child, what do you want to be in life? I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a manager, I want to be a computer specialist, whatever. So the child has all these dreams. Then after another 10 years, you ask him, what do you want? I want to get married to a nice person, I want to have nice children, I want my children to go to such and such school, and so on and so forth. Then what is your goal now? After another 10 years, I want to have a happy retired life, and so on and so forth. Another 10 years, what is your goal now? Well, goes on like this. Sometimes by then the person has realized, well, the goal of life is none of these things. These things were only vehicles for taking me towards the real goal of life. The real goal of life is the divine. But sometimes I've seen that it has not strictly related to age. The person is thinking of grandchildren, then he's thinking of great-grandchildren, and is never thinking that the goal of life is in fact the divine. But anyway, that is not the point. The point is that as the goal of life changes, our choices start changing. And one of the major changes that comes is the goal of life is spiritual growth. Now, that is also an ego-based decision, if you see. That now I have decided my goal of life is spiritual growth. I'll make the right choices. I'll make the choices based on the voice of the soul. It's again an I involved there. It's only when, you see, on that path, one finds that the ego becomes an obstacle rather than a help, that the ego has to be dropped, and it will drop on its own. Again, one doesn't have to be in a hurry. So ego is not all bad. The only thing is, when the ego is ready to be transformed, the ego is decided that, well, so far I have been asking for things which were not the best. The ego starts asking for the highest, then the ego becomes a helper. But then when it starts asking for the best, then on that path one realizes that ego starts becoming a barrier. Starts becoming a barrier because of the attachments to possessions, because of the attachments to family, and so on and so forth. And when one realizes that, then that is the time to start getting rid of this ego also. Because now further progress on that path would depend upon a reduction in the ego and a final elimination. Till that ego remains, those attachments will remain. Until those attachments remain, one cannot progress beyond that point. But the first few steps, even on the spiritual path, are taken entirely on that basis. So now where does free will come in all this? A lot, in fact, if you see once again. Because surrender and free will are not entirely separate. We have surrendered ourselves to the divine. But then what we have done is, we have surrendered our will to the divine will. We have decided to do whatever the divine wants us to do. But having discovered what the divine wants us to do, it has to be again filtered through the mind for us to actually do it. And therefore, this debate between determinism and free will also becomes something of a moot point. Because free will is not redundant here. The only thing is, we are using this free will properly. We are using the free will not to follow entirely the intellect, which would be based on calculations of gain and loss, but we are using this intellect to frame the reasons which would justify the voice of the soul and making those choices. So it's the transformed and purified and refined intellect which now is giving us the type of reasons which would justify what the soul wants, which enables us to make the right choices apparently based on our free will. And therefore, it is not in fact abandoning free will, but it is once again surrendering this free will to the divine, so that the free will itself starts doing what the divine will is. One of the American psychologists, Judith Viost, has put it very nicely. She says, in this world of multiple choice, the world is like a multiple choice question. All the students are familiar. The world itself is a multiple choice question. Every step we have a question and 3 or 4 choices available. One the choice of the mind, one of the intellect, and one of the soul. So in this world of multiple choice, we need to know both how to hold them and how to fold them. How to hold on to the choices and how to fold the choices, Which means hold on to the choices which are the right ones, which are based on the voice of the soul, fold up those which are not based on the right one. In this world of multiple choice, we need to know both how to hold them and how to fold them.